This is going to put to rest all of the myths and illusions. The circumstances surrounding the crucifixion of Jesus as it was related in the Bible were not in accordance with the customs and practices of either the Jews or the Romans. Actually, in several essential points, they were in direct violation of Roman law. Thus, it can easily be seen that the church fathers who compiled the Bible and interpolated the story had no knowledge of Roman history or Jewish traditions as they were at that time. Outside of the Bible account, there is no parallel or contemporaneous evidence that the crucifixion of Jesus actually took place. Author John Remsburg, in his book, The Christ, page 24, gives a list of 42 different authors who lived and wrote during the alleged time of Christ, or within a century of that time. And yet, aside from two forged passages in the works of the Jew Josephus and two historically disputed passages in the works of the Roman writers, there is no other mention of Jesus himself, much less his crucifixion. Outside of the Gospels, not a word historically written near or on the reputed time of Jesus has come down to us, not even touches of the subjects of his life and his alleged crucifixion. According to historical researchers who have critically researched this matter, the Gospels themselves were not written until at least 150 years after the alleged life of Jesus. There is no evidence from any source that there existed before that time a man named Jesus Christ. Also, that they were composed by collecting floating reports and including a few fragments of reports of different writers that are now lost. The first Christian writings that mention Jesus the Christ were ascribed to a man named Clemens Romanos, and the date of the writings anywhere between 96 and 97 AD. Some scholars refuse to recognize Clemens as the author of these works, saying that they did not appear until the 2nd century. Regarding this, the Encyclopedia Britannica, the 9th edition, 2nd volume, page 196, writes, "A whole literature arose around the name of Clemens in subsequent times. Of this literature, the following portions have come down to us. 1. A second epistle to the Corinthians found along with the first in the Codex. There's something called the Codex Alexandrinus. As far as we can judge from the writing itself, this work is rather a homily than a letter. In all probability, the author belonged to Egypt. Various superstitions or suppositions have been made as to its authorship, but none that commands the assent of a considerable number of critics. It seems to have been written towards the middle or second end of the 2nd century. The next to mention Jesus the Christ was Ignatius, whose epistles were written between 107 and 116 AD. You listen to me on this. Remember, I'm talking names that you could go back and find. Polycarp, Barnabas, Hermas, an unknown writer of the epistle to Diognetus, may have been written their relics before between 100 and 150 years after Jesus. Besides these, there are no other Christian or other writings referring to Jesus that date earlier than the middle and the 2nd century, except a few fragments of Quattro and Quadrato is the name of the man, and Aristo, written sometime between 117 and 138 AD. The 1st century of Christianity is a complete blackout historically. There is no known writings of the first 100 years of Christianity. We know nothing of what occurred for that 100 years' time. From 1 AD to 100 AD, blank. We are 3 generations removed from Jesus before a single word appears about him. Outside the books of the New Testament and the men who have examined them, the more lies and convoluted fables we find. All that have come down to us across the 3 generations has come by way of legend and unverified tradition. Few critical historians, even among Christians, give any real credit and traditional accounts to the disputed points of history. Now, the Talmud said, 40 years before the destruction of our temple, the judgment of capital causes was taken away from Israel. Hello? 40 years before the destruction of the temple, the judgment of capital causes was taken away from Israel. It means the Jews had no power. This is a profound revelation of an historic reality. Reality because this means that only the Roman authorities could exercise lawful jurisdiction of capital offenses. But the Gospels assert that it was the Jews who tried, convicted, and sentenced Jesus in their own court. And this they did without consultation with or authority from the Romans. Oh, yeah. It was not until after they judged him worthy of death that they delivered him to Pilate, or in any way sought due ratification for their actions. Even if the Jews did have the power to try Jesus for a capital offense, the trial was not in accordance with Jewish law, and Jewish authorities insist that it could not have happened in the way it was told in the Bible. The story goes that Jesus was taken for a preliminary examination before Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and elders were assembled in Matthew 26 and 57. That was illegal for Jewish law. This examination took place at night, which was also illegal. For in the work titled De Synedrios, chapter 1, volume 1, the Mishnah says that the capital trials are commenced only in the daytime and must also be concluded within that day. You want proof? He also writes that the law also provided that capital trials should not be held on the day of the Sabbath or a fasting day. The meeting of the council at which Jesus was finally condemned took place on a Friday morning, the day before the Sabbath. That is, the same day Jesus was alleged to have been crucified. Another point, Jesus was questioned in his own case. That is, he represented himself in propria persona. This is not permitted by Jewish law. With this law, in fact, a Jew could not even plead himself guilty. Maimonides, the Jewish scholar, writes, "Our law condemns no one to death upon his own confession." Listen, I know it's tedious, but I'm dropping some pearls here so you can put the threads together to have the argument to show that Christianity is of no force. By law, the judge himself could not make any judicial use of the defendant's testimony. Another Jewish scholar historian named Bartamore writes, "It is a fundamental principle with us, the Jew, that no one can damage himself by what he says in his own judgment." Now, taking the above into account, it seems that Matthew knows absolutely nothing about Jewish laws. He not only has the high priest questioning Jesus, but persisting in his own efforts to force him to testify. Read Matthew 26, 59 through 63. That's the judge telling him to testify, forcing him to testify. The gospel scribes seem to know diddly about court procedures. They make the judges into prosecutors and have the judges work up the evidence against him. They are represented as having determined in advance on the death of Jesus, and then manufacturing the evidence to accomplish their design, condemning the prisoner before the trial began, and suborning witnesses and subpoenaing witnesses for the purpose of giving the trial a legal aspect. Matthew says that the chief priests and the whole council sought false witness against Jesus, that they might put him to death. Matthew 26 and 59. But in the administration of Jewish law, the judge acts as an impartial advocate for the prisoner, like the judge advocate for the court-martial, for a court-martial. The judge is charged with preventing any undue influence from prevailing against the prisoner. Even if the judges were the most corrupt and capable of doing the most heinous things, the gospel alleges, it is not credible that they should have deemed to have done it safe so, because did they not tell you that they feared the multitude? No witnesses were allowed to testify for the defense. Yet at that time, Jewish law demanded the right of a vigorous defense, and this was scrupulously adhered to for the protection of the accused. So, to condemn the defendant Jesus right at the completion of the prosecutor's testimony, before the defense had anything to say, the prosecutor said it, kill him. Even me and brother over here speaking law knows that somebody got to get a fair trial. Hey, you did all these miraculous things. We got to try you for. Blasphemy was not punishable by death under Jewish law. Yet that was the charge under which Jesus was condemned. Read Matthew 26, verse 65. But Jesus was not guilty of blasphemy according to Jewish law. The Mishnah states that blasphemy entails the mention of a divine name at the time, Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh, and that the accused is not guilty of the crime until he mentions or expresses the name before them. Jesus didn't do that. For Jesus to claim that he was the Messiah was not blasphemy under Jewish law, nor was it blasphemy to claim